just talking about Southern hospitality. We've lived in Metro Chicago a long time, originally from South Dakota. Was there anything about people in the South that surprised you? Anything that, more to the point, that didn't go with what your expectations?
Well, yeah, I had a very kind of sheltered upbringing, and I had never mixed with non-Catholics, right? So now I am exposed to a lot of primitive Baptists, right? I've never even heard of primitive Baptists, and now I am in their churches, and it's extremely different, a Catholic church from a primitive Baptist church. I am so inexperienced and such a hick myself that it bothered me to sit in the alto section because I had my back to what would normally be an altar. Well, it wasn't an altar, it was just a podium to preach from. The pulpit, I'm sorry, the pulpit. Yeah, I mean, it was kind of a culture shock. The other thing I learned, no, I'm not going to bring that, never mind. Yeah, that was just the open-handed warmth, which, is not a feature of most people anywhere. It was just that first Holly Springs Ted and I went to, we couldn't get, the plane that was going back was not like for 4 or 5 hours after the singing from Atlanta. And one of the people that had come up to Paxton to sing at that funny little first convention was Dolores McGraw. She was a cousin of his. And, we'd gotten kind of to be friends, and she's kind of my age. And so we didn't have anything like, any way to kill time after the singing, so that's in Bremen, Georgia, and now we've got a plane 4 or 5 hours later. And so Dolores says, well, you can come over to my house, and I don't know if we just leaned out of where she thought she had to do that, but she did. And so off we go to Dolores' house, country mom and dad, country sister, and the dad says, Ozell, he says, I'm a hard shell Baptist. He probably thought I knew what that meant. Hard shell. Anyway, so Dolores disappears for a while, then she comes back. She had run over to Walmart and purchased 2 more lawn chairs because there wasn't enough to seat everybody, because we had showed up kind of unannounced. I always felt bad for being just rude for, I'm sure they enjoyed having us, but I felt funny just, going to somebody's house, but I didn't understand how easy it was for them to think, oh, we've got company from far, far away, or a couple chairs, but stuff like that, I just found very moving. That she would go and buy 2 chairs so we could sit down for a couple of hours and visit. It was just sweet. They were all sweet. All those people were, there's plenty to miss. That whole generation that taught us, I'm sitting here now, I'm living on borrowed time. That whole generation that taught us, were older than we were. They'd always call us you youngsters. We were full 40, 50. But we were youngsters. Everybody was over 50 that I was talking about. And now everybody's under 50. And somehow I feel like I'm bridging this gap between that whole world, which I consider almost exclusively Southern, and all of you that I see here that are carrying this on, which is their fondest desire, which they wanted more than anything for this not to die and for it to go on. But I feel like there's these 2 different worlds, 2 completely different groups of people. And some of you already know too. I mean, some of you have shared this with me. That there's this group now, and there was that group then, and there was kind of a break in the middle. from the time most of them were passing on, there wasn't a big surge of new singers immediately. It took a while for that groundswell to happen, and it has happened now. It has happened now, but I didn't think it was going to, and I just feel like I'm in an odd place, being able to look back and see all those faces, and then I look around and see these faces, and most of you never met. Most of you never met. But I know both of you, sort of. Well, I know them more than I know a lot of new singers now, because they're brand new. Anyway, I'm privileged, and I feel glad that I've been spared to say what you've inherited is absolutely great. I don't have to tell you that. I think you already know, even if you've only been here one day. There is so little these days that you can say, this is a quality product. There is no pecking order, there is no money, there is no ego. This is the most democratic institution maybe in the U.S. Maybe in the U.S. Except for a few front bench people that we like to, help us hold the singing together. It's completely democratic. That's just remarkable. That's just remarkable. I think it's a treasure. You know that.
Well, thank you, Judy. I think you've all heard enough from me. Does anybody have a question that they'd like to ask?
I'll pass the mic.
Thanks, man. It's tied around the stand.
Careful by the speaker. Go sideways to the
Yeah, they may
speaker.
have to come up.
Yeah.
Great.
Great.
I muted you. You're good.
Okay.
Let me turn you back on.
Okay. If you could just talk a little bit about the process of finding out you had songs in the 1991 book. About when you had songs in the 1991 Sacred Harp. If you pitched those, if there was an open submission process. I'm sure it was very exciting for you when those songs went in there, but would just love to hear a little bit about that.
But the song's going into the 911.
Yes, the process and just how you felt about it afterwards.
Well, I of course had no idea that the book is, I was in my own little world, I was just having fun, making music myself and making these little tapes and singing just with the group here in Chicago. I didn't know that there was, this wider organization down south who was planning a revision. I didn't realize the book was revised about every 25 years or so. And he was planning a revision. And all I knew is that some of us like to sing, discover tunes that were not in the book that we like to sing. We had these little, supplements. And so Hugh got wind of this and realized that almost every group had a bunch of song sheets in the back of their books. So he started going around, and he would come to singings all over, and he would collect whatever, the people were singing all over the place. And so he collected a Midwest supplement along with songs from all over the place. So the submissions in 1991 totaled 100, not 1,100, 100. So some of us went down to sing through them. It was recorded just in one day, not like 6 different times with this one. We sang through them, and then the tapes were turned back to the music committee, I think, and they listened through and they made their choices. I think probably that I was just serendipitously in the vanguard of people writing tunes because nobody else was doing it at the time, or it wasn't like a big groundswell of tune writing. And so I was just writing these tunes, and we happened to make it in this funny little book that we sang in Chicago. And, I didn't have any big plans to, make it go any further than it did. I was just having fun here in Chicago, but he was looking to reach out and grab stuff that people liked from all the place and put it in the book to obviously make the book stronger. He kept saying, and of course, Hugh's big thing was living composers. That's why all those other two books died, because they didn't have all the, they didn't have any living composers. And he wanted to make sure Sacred Heart always had living composers. So he grabbed tunes from there, old tunes that we had found, Africa. I actually discovered Africa because I had snatched one of Ted Mercer's books. I think it was The Why After Kentucky. And so I called him up one morning and says, Ted, you have got to hear this tune. It's called Africa. It's by William Billy. I'm like, oh. Anyway, so that was in supplement. And the music community was very generous. And, people have said, well, I don't think Granville and Wood Street sound like Sacred Heart. And I thought, well, I don't think so either. But I just don't know how to do it. I only have my own musical background. So I'm writing my idea of Sacred Heart tunes with Street Granville, and that music committee very generously reached out and took them in. I think if I'd had a lot more competition, maybe not so much, but there wasn't much competition. And a lot of the tunes being submitted were old, from the 1800s. And so, does that sort of answer?
So did you get, was Granville in the Midwest Supplement? Is that where? Okay, so you got it from the Midwest Supplement.
Yes.
And how about Ainsley and Stone Point?
Yes.
Oh, and Wood Street, okay.
What about New Agatite? Was that in this?
This is really rude. I grabbed Ted and Marcia's Street and named a tune Agatite, because my second tune I wrote. So when Ted Jensen started writing, which was later, he had to name it New Agatite, because that was his I didn't know he was going to start writing, or I wouldn't have done it. I would have named it something else, but I was naming it after my friend's street.
And at the time, you lived on Granville.
I lived in Granville. Ted and about 6 other singers lived on Wood Street. My sister lived on Ainsley.
Relative, when you told me that you didn't submit, that Hugh McGraw just gathered stuff. So I started looking for the books, and I found a bunch of them, but I started asking people.
I wasn't aware.
Sorry, I can't hear you.
I wasn't aware that he was like actively, I think he heard about a revision, but I didn't even point to two.
Use the mic.
Oh, I'm sorry, excuse me. I didn't even equate the two that he was planning a revision and that he was gathering tunes together. I didn't even think that far ahead. I'm not a visionary. Okay. Oh, he's looking to tunes to put in this new. Okay. No, I didn't get that until later.
So it wasn't like the most recent revision process where there was a call for composers.
Okay, so I went back to New England and I started asking the people that were still around, well, how did you submit? Because it didn't seem to be the same way they did now, and nobody really paid much attention to what was going on. So I asked Glenn Wright, well, what happened there? And Glenn said, well, we were doing a convention, I imagine in New England. Hugh McGraw came up with a busload and that type of thing. So they get done with the convention and it's late, so Glenn Wright and a couple of friends get a motel room. And they're singing up into the night. Well, it happens that Hugh McGraw got a motel room right next to them. So in the middle of the night, Hugh McGraw comes over and knocks on the door and says, what's that you're singing? And Glenn Wright says, well, it's my song. He says, I want to put that in the book. So it's like a submission? No, it's a motel room next door.
Does that answer your question? Anybody else?
Another 5 minutes.
Go ahead. Mr. Jim.
And first off, a historical question. You talked about the first singing at the Old Town School of Folk Music. Didn't know where it came from. Did you ever figure out who organized that? Was that a Phil Trier thing or something? Oh,
Jim wanted to know if I ever figured out who exactly organized that first singing at the Old Town School of Folk Music. Now, there were people in Chicago in an older folk community. The Armstrongs, George and Jerry Armstrong, the first family of folk in Chicago, and Phil Trier. They had sung with, they were aware of the Golden Ring, is that right? Mm-hmm. The Golden Ring? Thank you. Your memory is better than mine. But this goes back into the 60s or even the 50s, the people who had been involved in folk music back then. And I had called Jerry Armstrong, but Jerry, you've been in folk music a million years. Tell me about these shapes. What do they mean? And she said she didn't know. She just didn't know, so I gave up. But it was oddly shortly after that there's an announcement there's going to be Sacred Harp singing at the Old Town School. So I don't know if in their little community they started talking about it and decided that they knew about it, they probably had done it, and they thought, well, let's introduce it at the school. It's the obvious place to do it. But I was just like, wait a minute, I've been hanging around there for years and I never heard anybody mention this, till now.
is it completely unrelated and of different sort? 15 years ago or so, when Buell was here for the anniversary singing, he did a talk. This was right after he published the last book there. And among other things, I think Ann Hyder actually asked him a question about, it was roughly, what does he not like about what has changed over the years? And he talked a little bit about some things that were still in flux, the need for people to actually be experienced to be on the front bench, at least for any length of time during the day. And he was concerned about the memorial lesson having strayed a little bit far from where it had been, which was to say, mostly singers. And I realize you're talking to a large and diverse group and you don't want to offend anybody, but what troubles you, if anything, about the state of Sacred Harp today compared to where it was when you started?
Well, yeah, he knew and I knew, we talked about this, that any new group of singers is going to alter what's going on slightly. They're just going to. Now, there are some hard and fast rules that we obey. I think back then, 90%, 100% of the singers considered a Sacred Harp singing partially religious event, a service almost. There might not be preaching, but it was kind of a religious event, and people were very dressed up, suits and ties, dresses, Sunday go to meeting. Sometimes I'm a little nervous about the casualness now, but I know that a great many people now do not consider it. They may consider it a spiritual experience, and that's what a lot of people, the term they've used. But not religious in a narrow sense, like church going, denominational or something. I think the fact that the prayers, even for people who are solidly atheistic, will stand up and be respectful when someone is saying, the chaplain is saying the prayer. I really like to think that in spite of very different, religious or non-religious affiliations now, that the bones of the Sacred Harp are coming forward and being preserved. I have such great respect for the tradition. It's like, would I get dressed up on Sunday because I consider it a religious experience? No, but maybe because I have great respect for the people who gave this to me. It was a very precious, it was maybe the most precious thing that they owned. And they opened their hands and they gave it to us without any hesitation. And with any brains, you can see that it was a very precious gift. It was, you know, one of the things they held most dear. When they would talk about it, they might weep, you know. And I think when we first start, it's not much more than a hootenanny, you know. You just come in off the street and it's like, oh, this is fun, and you know, it's like bewildering. There's so much to concentrate on, and you know, the words are reflecting a very outdated theology, which maybe people ignore. Other people are paying very close attention to the texts. And we're all sitting there shoulder to shoulder, the atheists next to the Jews, next to the Catholics, next to the primitive Baptists and the Presbyterians. But one of the first things I went to, one old fellow said to me, you know, when we, I don't know if somebody asked me what church or something. Anyway, he says, you know, at the Sacred Heart singing, you never talk about religion or politics. And it's the reason often a singing feels a little bit unearthly, because earthly people can be such a pain. Yes, we keep it on a high level. Is that unrealistic? Hey, we can go outside the door and be as realistic as we want, and we will. But here, we're just going to keep the level up here, and that's why we get blissed out.